Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and I am the president of the Engaged Church Network, and we are glad that you have joined us today for this podcast. I am particularly pleased to introduce you to today's guest. Lisa Francisco was the Minister of Finances at, what was your official title? Executive.
Which year?
Oh, yeah. Which year?
Yeah. My last title was Executive Director of Central Support, which basically meant everything non-ministry related.
Everything non-ministry.
Yeah.
But I knew her as Minister of No.
That's true.
She took care of all of the budget, financial needs, all of that for Brentwood Baptist Church, and she and I worked together for over 20 years. Lisa began her career in the corporate world in the Nashville area, working for HCA and audit and that kind of stuff. And then when Brentwood Baptist Church started getting a certain size where we needed professional attention to our finances, Lisa was brought in and did a brilliant job with us. So we're glad to talk to you today about some of the basics of stewardship and how we manage and take care of the Lord's money. Now, Lisa, thanks for being here. I'm glad to see you. We've already exchanged pictures of the grandchildren,
yes,
and all of that, so we can get right to it. Let's go back to a long time ago when you came into Brentwood Baptist Church. You and I have laughed a couple of times because you thought it was going to be slower, easier than your corporate world.
Yes. And first I want to clarify, Minister of No, I spelled it K-N-O-W. He spelled it N-O.
N-O.
So
you can't do it. Lisa won't let you do this.
You know, when I came into the church, I can remember many months before I even interviewed for this job thinking one day, what's it like to work in a church? And then I'm like, why on earth did I think of that? But people think that in a church we sit around and praying and reading our Bible, and it is a business. And especially toward the end of my career at Brentwood Baptist Church, you know, in the early days, we get month end close, and I'd actually have a chance to say, what is on my list that I still need to work on? But it is very busy. When people give their money, they are giving out of their gratitude to the Lord. They're not buying a service that you can't sell Jesus. He's free. And so when they give their money, they're giving it because their heart has said, I love my Jesus and I want to help. I want to be a part of his ministries. And so they give that. And so it's a huge responsibility to make sure you're taking care of the money that's coming in. As I've mentioned before, you've said many times, if you take care of the golden goose, she'll continue to lay the golden eggs. But one thing I love so much about working under you is that you supported the fact that we needed to have controls in place. We need to be transparent with our congregations. We needed to have accountability. I mean, he would always get up in front of the congregation and say, Lisa won't even let me buy Oreos. And he said, you can feel them just take a sigh of relief.
You could really, when we talked about the finance, when I would take the time to remind them, let's talk about our system and how I don't have access to the checking account. I don't go to the finance meetings unless they call me for input on something.
And in the 21 years I was there, you never got called in.
I never got called in. I would usually meet with them going, hey, here's what I see coming in the year ahead, and that would be my total input. But under your leadership, we had financial professionals who were managing our money on that team, so they didn't need a Baptist preacher messing with the money. So when you come into a situation like this, and now you are kind of consulting with new churches and that kind of thing, what are the first kind of questions that you ask them?
I would first want to know a little bit about, first of all, who's doing their bookkeeping or accounting for them? Do they have any processes in place? And find out where they are in the process. Because even an early church plant, I mean, you still can do things. You don't have enough staff to have everything separated out and a lot of super controls, but you can still have controls over the integrity of the finances. So I would want to know, okay, is it done in-house or are you outsourcing it? Who's handling the offering when it comes in? Are you taking are you sending the offering plate? Are you doing online giving? Or using a lot of churches have moved to where they just have a locked container at the back to
Right.
put their offering in. So how are you collecting that? And are there two people with that money all the time to make sure that nobody can ever accuse the person taking care of the offering that they've stolen any of it?
Right. Or lost it
Or
anything.
lost
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the churches I was working with recently, and I was reviewing their processes, and I asked about that, and then he came back and said, we're not actually counting the cash before we put it in the locked bag. We've got the checks. No, they were counting the cash. They were not adding up the checks. And I'm like, you got to do that too, because you have to have that control. You also have to have that number to balance too when that gets entered on the back
Right.
end. So that's probably where I'd ask first is, what processes do you have currently in place? Do you have a finance team? Because a finance team can help review the books and help give assurance to your congregation that things are above board. Those are the types of things I'd start with. And like paying the bills. Who signs off on the bills? You don't want the pastor to be signing off the bills. You want to try to remove him from that process so people can't say that he is monkeying with books,
Right.
spending money on things he doesn't need to spend on, various things like that.
Most pastors, especially when they're getting started, think that they have to be in control of everything. And I didn't believe that. And I don't believe that because it causes frustration in the congregation. There's no check and balances. There's
Correct.
no. I want to be sure, and we were always insistent. You put the system together. I was always insistent that the system be there, so that if any church member asked us any time about how the money was handled, where the funds were for this project or this ministry or this mission, we could show them with documentation.
Yes.
So talk to me about how important it is to have that transparent of a system so that your members feel good about giving.
Yeah. And first of all, I would say to that pastor who thinks they have to be in control of everything is God has wired us all differently.
Yes.
I'm not a pastor. I don't get up there and preach, but my team was allowed ministry to happen because we took care of the back end stuff. So find somebody in your congregation that is good at that and have them walk alongside you as you find what do you need to do with your finances. Maybe that would be your first chair of your finance team to make sure that you have somebody there that can walk alongside you. But now go back to your question again. I lost the question.
No, just tell me how important it is to have that kind of system.
It is. And also it's very important that pastor point out to their other ministers the importance of following the systems. One of the best gifts that you gave me is when you would stand up in front of our team and tell them, you need to do what Lisa says because she's keeping us off the front page of the newspaper. Everybody wants to. And you've seen these churches that have gotten in trouble and they blow up all over the front page of the newspaper. And because they're always looking to take a church down. That's Satan at work there. But that was a gift because if people understand that everybody on your staff knows that if there's something that's outside of what we have approved for budget, you need to go talk to, first of all, your supervisor, but work with the person that's in charge of the finances to see, is there funding for that? We didn't use purchase orders at Brentwood Baptist Church, except for with one minister who spent 90% of his budget by July, and he didn't stay around a lot longer after that. But your ministers are grown-ups. They should be able to follow the rules, the requirements.
Right.
But on my side, you also have to, my ministry was a ministry of grace with them when they did need something that they hadn't planned for.
Yeah. I want to stop and talk to the pastors just a second and remind you that, as Lisa said, we have people in our congregations who are gifted differently than you are. And while you may have the vision, while you may have the burden and understand where the church needs to go, you do not have all the gifts required to make that vision happen. And if you are wise and smart, you're going to find somebody like Lisa who has the gift of organization, who has the gift of administration, and who sees herself serving God's greater kingdom work and is blessed when the numbers are balanced and all of that. She gets the same kind of blessing out of that you do in preaching a good sermon. So you need to open up these avenues of ministry so that people can do what God has called them to do, and they can serve the church well. You and I have had this conversation about how excited you were to be able to use your gifts to support all that Brentwood Baptist Church was doing.
I never dreamed God could use a CPA to serve in His kingdom like that, and it was. It meant the needs of my family because I could take off when I need to be with the girls. But man, it turned from a blessing in my life to a passion on my life.
Right. So when, what are the kind of things that those top of your mind kind of things that most pastors would want to do if they just knew to do?
Yeah. Well, and we start off with the finance team, but there again, getting somebody that is gifted in understanding the financial situation that can walk alongside of you and can tell you can interpret. You're not expected to be an expert in that, but you do need to understand that, you can have less going out than you got coming in.
Right.
To manage the cash flows, especially in a young church, you've got to manage the cash flows. To walk alongside you and talk about, okay, you need to talk about the offering a little bit more in the service because they need to know that we need to give and support the ministries. We talked about the cash. Make sure there's always two people handling the cash, and whoever handles the cash gets somebody else to open the bank statement and look at it.
Yeah, because, we say that, but there have been people whose lives have been ruined because something happened out of their control, but because nobody was there to back them up.
Right.
The church became suspicious of them and friendships were lost.
Right.
Churches messed up because two people didn't take the money to the bank.
Yeah. Or somebody didn't sign off on a large expenditure of something that really shouldn't have been purchased.
Right.
There are times and places when an expenditure that might look unusual is actually a reasonable expense, especially when you get into the children's ministry and some of the creative things. And I can remember with Jay Strother one time, he'd brought back a rocket or something. And he says, I called him on it. I didn't. I was just giving him a little bit of dig, because we had a good relationship. But ask questions. Whoever's on your finance team needs to ask questions if they don't think something looks right. Because just because it doesn't look like a normal purchase doesn't mean it wouldn't be appropriate. For example, maybe there was a family in need and one of the ministers went out and bought an outfit for them to wear to a funeral of their loved one. Mm-hmm. That would look like, why are you buying clothes for a female's clothes? Well, may not necessarily be something that is inappropriate. You just have to ask the question.
Yeah, and have the documentation.
And who approved it. Make sure that somebody else knew that this was going to happen. Yeah. Approved it. Maybe even that one on a young church might be one that you'd want to go to your finance team, and they approved that you could go out and do that. Yeah. It's all about protecting the integrity of the church finances so that the church can flourish.
Right. And so that people feel, you tell the story about helping out buying some clothes and that kind of stuff. We see the expenditure. It's unusual. Mm-hmm. We question it. We hear the story of how the church ministered to a family at a particular point in need. Everybody feels better about that, and then they're more excited about their giving.
Yes, they are.
With that. I tell people often about Bill Kinney, who was chair of our finance committee a bunch of years ago.
I know his name. I didn't know him.
While we were still on Franklin Road. Uh-huh. And Bill Kinney put in the debt wedge, the 2% debt wedge. He said, we don't know where we're going to build, how we're going to build, when we're going to build, but we know we're going to build, so we're going to start paying for it while we were anticipating that growth. Well, because it was such a small thing, and he did it over so long, 10 years of moving.
Yeah, I think when I got there, it was maybe 10%, and it moved up to 20%.
It moved up just a little bit every year, but nobody knew. It didn't hurt anybody. But when we paid the facility off, we had a $2.5 million windfall because of his leadership. And everybody comes to me and goes, "Man, you are brilliant." I had nothing to do with that, nor would I have thought of that.
Yeah.
But he did. And other people of our finance team have said, if you do this, if you handle the money this way, if we invest it here while we're waiting, it was...
well, and just like our maintenance reserve that we went and put in place, you get a new building and everybody thinks, oh, we got a brand new building. But one day that building is not going to be new anymore.
Right.
And so you have to start preparing. What are you going to do? Nobody wants to take up a love offering to do a parking lot or an air conditioner. They want that air conditioner fixed. But I remember the first year we put money toward that, we put $25,000 away. And that was under Jim Baker. And we did that, and then we continued to grow it. Well, by the time I left, we were putting 5% of our budget toward maintenance reserve so that, especially with 9 campuses, that we could accommodate the needs. And so that's one of the other things I always tell churches I'm working with. Do you have any kind of a reserve for when you have that air conditioner go out, or you have a boiler issue or something like that you don't have to go.
And it's going to happen.
Yes, it will happen.
It's going to happen.
It will happen. And then if you don't have to spend it because, you estimated that piece of equipment was going to last 10 years and it lasts 15, well, that's great because you
still keep serving it up.
You can use it for something else because something will happen.
So what happens when good policy isn't followed?
Well...
well, in our case, you would lose your job.
Well, maybe not. I ministered with grace, and so, I would talk to somebody, but I can remember one time a person with a credit card, they kept getting it confused with their personal one, and I'm like, I'm willing to put a little sticker on your church one so that you can know which one's your church one and which one's your personal one, and they never made that mistake again. So, I want to always honor people as an adult, that they are going to handle things correctly. But that's not, sometimes people just mess up. So, but I feel like by the time we would let them go, they had an opportunity to be walking under a plan to get them where they needed to be. And then if they still couldn't follow the policies, then.
Which were there for their protection.
Which were there for them, their protection and the church's protection. Yeah.
So it's mission, vision, and strategies, values and all of that, but there has to be a budget that supports that, and the budget has to be in service of the mission and vision.
Yes.
So talk to me about how we put the budget together.
Okay. So when I first got there, it was a little different. So I'm going to talk about the later days because I know how to do that budget better. But we would you want your budget to be a faith budget, but you don't want it to be so out there that there's no way you can achieve it because that is demoralizing to everybody. But we would analyze our giving and look at the trends in the giving over the years. And of course, the last several years with COVID and whatnot, it's been a little more difficult. But we would analyze that. And if we were experiencing like a 4% growth every year, well, then that might be a realistic thing to look at. My predecessor had developed this wonderful thing that I could have never done called a regression analysis. Yeah. But basically, you're just analyzing based on trends. Where do you think's the highest you could go? And backing it back down a little bit because you don't want to push that envelope.
Right.
But once you get that, what you think your number is going to be, then you have to figure out where are the priorities for our church. Off the top, we would take the money for the debt wedge when we had the debt. And after that, we still took, not as much, but we took some away to go toward what we called our Middle Tennessee Initiative, toward where God may be leading you, but you don't know it yet because he hasn't given you that vision quite yet. He's letting you fund it for it. And for the building reserve, the maintenance reserve, we would put money off the top. But then we allowed people, we would say, you can assume you had as much as last year because we were anticipating growth, but then they would have to justify why they needed more money. So we'd say, Here's your dream budget. If you could have whatever you wanted, tell us what you would need and why you need it.
Right.
Is your preschool ministry growing? They may need more money this year. Don't just give everybody the same amount to increase because God is not working the same in all the ministries.
Right.
So you have to tie it to, if our focus is gospel conversations, then maybe we need to focus more on the discipleship this year than maybe the mission trips. Or if we've got a new ministry partner overseas and with all the catastrophes that are happening,
Right.
maybe we need to put more money into missions this year, but figure out how that strategy matches up with your goals that you've set for where you're going.
And that is a hard process. A lot of people would kind of resist it in that you are hindering the Spirit kind of thing by all of these forms, and it's too businesslike and that kind of stuff. I would always remind them that, listen, if we see God moving, we can change all of this with one vote. We can get the church together and say, here is an unexpected opportunity that God has put before us, and we need to respond to it. And the church can always change its mind. But
there again, if you have some reserves that are set aside for what God brings you, we'd always have some money in the budget for contingencies. Right. But especially once we started that reserve, what we called Middle Tennessee Initiative, once we started that, if we saw somewhere God was working, just like our ministry residency program, that was something that came out because God had encouraged us to set money aside.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation and this podcast, and we'll have you back because this is an important issue for pastors and the integrity of the giving. What are the three things you want our pastor friends to hear?
I would probably encourage you to make sure somebody is looking at your financial statements, whether you're having it done in-house or outside of the church by a CPA firm or some bookkeepers or something. Have somebody looking at your finances and making sure if anything looks unusual that they ask questions. Not every church needs an audit. Not every church needs to spend money on like that, especially if they don't have a bank note. But you might want to even ask somebody to come in and say, okay, can you test some of the procedures over here in payroll, or just something that'll give you some assurance that everything is running smoothly. So that would be one of the things. If you don't have a finance team, highly recommend a finance team. That would be your person that's looking at your financials. Right. Third thing, just have accountability for where you're spending money. Whether it's if you have a deacon board that reviews the budget, of course it goes before your congregation, but have accountability for where the money's being spent to make sure that we are acting in line with our mission, vision, values, and strategies.
And here's the real reason you want to do this. People give more if they trust the system. If they know if I give X dollars to the church, then it's going to accomplish the mission that you told me it was going to do, then they'll feel better about giving and be more generous in their giving. And you want to, as Paul reminds the early church, refrain from the appearance of evil. Now, one of my running jokes with Lisa is that every year I would request an airplane. I would, in our budget requirements, I would slip in there, $85 million for a new jet, something like that. And of course, then I would need hangar and maintenance and all of that. Of course, every year it would get turned down. It was always the kind of the running joke that we had going. But I can't tell you the freedom it gave me to be able to talk about the finances of Brentwood Baptist Church and to talk freely about what we were doing with our resources, knowing that I had Lisa Francisco behind me and all of those systems to validate the work that we were doing. So no matter where you are in church life, if you're just getting started in the church plant or if you've been there as I was for 30 years, increase the integrity of the system. Yes. It's the first thing you do to increase your giving. Lisa, it's always a privilege. Thank you for your time and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. And if I may, if you all have other questions and need some assistance, Mike knows how to get in touch with me.
Hey, there you go. There's another free service from the Engaged Church Network. I'm Mike Glenn, and this is the Engaged Church Network podcast. Thanks for joining us.